What is the dumbest mistake you've made at work? This one makes me laugh when I think about it. I was 16, pushing grocery carts outside a grocery store. Lot attendant was my title, and my job was to make sure chaos didn't break out in the parking lot. But I also had some other duties like taking out trash, emptying ashtrays, and doing a few other odd little jobs around the store. One day, a woman tapped me on the shoulder in the store and said, "I'm sorry, but my kid just reached over that display." She points at this display of Entenmann's snack cake that was freestanding in between some aisles, and I can see that this toddler had clearly retched all over it. There were some on most of the boxes, and I think, I'll handle this. So I scoop up all the boxes, take them out to the dumpster, and throw them all away. And as I'm dusting my hands off and congratulating myself on being so helpful,
listen, look, and listen, and learn.
a manager was like, "What did you just do?" And I said, "I cleaned up a big mess. A kid retched on everything." And he said, "Yeah, but you can't just throw a whole display away. There's a process, inventory. We have to report these losses." I said, "I push shopping carts, man. I don't know anything about any of that." And he let out a long sigh and said, "Okay, this isn't going to be fun for either of us." Then he lowered me by my ankles into the dumpster, and I had to fish out all the snack cake boxes covered in child mess and then learn how to scan them through some kind of computer. And in case you're wondering, I haven't eaten an Entenmann snack cake since. Not a bad mistake, just a sucky one, I guess. A learning experience mostly. Story 2. Large printer, one of those office units. Well, I had a manual switch to go between 220 and 110 volts. Halfway around the world, a coworker forgot to change the switch to the correct voltage and fried the power supply. It's going to take a week to get a replacement unit, but my coworker needs to depart to go to his wedding. So a week later, I fly out to finish this guy's job and install the new unit. I forget to check the voltage and fry it again. Oops. A lady at work replied to a promotion notice with, "This switch doesn't work at all, just takes credit for our work." Sent it as reply all. Story 3. Not me, but a middle-aged female in another department was unmuted while taking a massive dump and loudly taking a personal call on her cell. All 265 people on the call could hear her answer the phone and start talking about whatever while hearing the distinct sound of pee followed by farts and plops. Despite the CEO and the group directors all calmly at first, telling her to please mute before the panic started to set in. She thought she was muted the entire time and had the volume set so low she couldn't hear people yelling at her, so she could instead be on her own call. It was almost 5 minutes into the call when we could hear the toilet paper rolling in the dispenser that she went quiet and left the meeting a second later. This was also not a work-from-home position either. What a crappy situation? Story 4. Put an adrenaline needle through my thumb. I was basically messing around with return stock at a pharmacy whilst destroying old medication. Our old-fashioned pharmacist/owner would always prime the adrenaline injectors and hit them into the wall to get rid of the liquid before disposing of it. I stupidly tried doing this myself one day, but I squeezed the wrong end as I tried to prime it. I felt like such an idiot. The needle wasn't actually used, it was just out-of-date stock that a patient had returned. I still think about what could have happened quite often nearly 15 years later. Story 5. Brand new manager trainee had to sit through doomed by 90s OSHA videos. All the stuff I had seen before and I was incredibly bored of it. At the end of the video, there was a random guy in our office I assumed was a customer and I sarcastically said, "Well, that was an hour I'll never get back." He goes, "Did you not enjoy it?" I said, "Yeah, I didn't at all, but I get it. Safety comes first, so it's necessary. But the videos are so common sense, it hurts. Anyway, can I help you real quick? I have a meeting to get to. Big guy from corporate merchandising team several states away is going to be here in an hour or two." He goes, "I'm filling in for a big guy from corporate. I'm the North American safety director. Let's have a chat about your vision of safety at our workplace since you have that all figured out." Story 6. I was a tank crewman in the Army, gunner. After we finished one of our gunnery tables, which you can think of as training exercises where you drive around and fire at targets, then get graded on everything from time to accuracy to proper fire commands, we reported in for grading. One particular engagement I was feeling real confident about. Our commands were on point, we were quick, and my aim was spot on. It contained a moving target, which was plywood cut out of a truck that moves on rails and is heated from behind so that we can pick it up on thermal sights. Anyway, our quote-unquote grading went something like, "Well, your time was good, fire commands were perfect, and your aim was spot on. But unfortunately, we're going to have to give you 0 points for this engagement because your target was actually over here on this hillside. What you hit was a badger." In the recording from the tower's FLIR camera, it was very obviously a poor badger just minding his own business, waddling along the hillside that I annihilated with a 120mm sabot round. Story 7. Ate a cookie a customer gave me. Oh no, those were for later. Yeah, I could tell by the aftertaste. Thanks, though. I'll just go spend the rest of the day on maintenance tasks away from customers. Luckily, I'm the boss, so I just put on headphones and started fixing crap around the shop. I let my main manager know the screw up, and he kind of just didn't send anyone my way for the rest of the day. Definitely got razz for that one every time I brought in baked goods for the team for years, though. Story 8. Well, many years ago, while in my early days of military life, I was in charge of ordering supplies for my division. I was trying to order D batteries for mag lights. I wanted to order about 38 cases, which were 380 batteries. I misread how they came. I thought it was ordered by each, so I ordered 380 batteries. That was the first mistake. For the second mistake, I actually fat fingered it and ordered 3,800. To compound the error, the unit of issue was by the case. I ended up with 3,800 cases of D batteries while at sea on an aircraft carrier. It sucks so bad. Story 9. I work in payroll, so $5,000 to $10,000 mistakes aren't uncommon. I was testing out a new warning/deduction code on a new account and had entered $5,000 as a test check. I forgot to delete it before processing, and it went to a terminated employee who promptly emptied his bank account so we couldn't pull it back. Much worse, a coworker rerouted something like 15 to 20 direct deposits to her own account. It's all super traceable with username and timestamp records of every single change, so she was promptly fired and I believe arrested. Story 10. We were in an all-hands meeting over Zoom, small company, around 90 employees. I'd just hired 6 new people, mostly remote. CEO ended the meeting by opening it up to questions. I wanted to sound welcoming to the new employees, but I didn't want to turn on my mic, so I typed in the chat, "Where are all the new employees located?" Immediately hit send. Except I didn't type new. I accidentally hit J on the keyboard instead of N, and I didn't proofread before sending. So I asked the entire company where the Jew employees are located. Immediately followed up with, quote, "new asterisk OMG, I'm so sorry," and my CEO played it in stride like a pro. Best part, one of the Jewish employees slacked me after the meeting to tell me where he was located. Story 11. I worked in a mental hospital as a janitor. I'd been there for about a week when someone said I needed to clean a part I'd never cleaned before. It was a wing that had a security desk and a locked door. Halfway through mopping the floor, the entire place looked locked down because one of the violent patients got out. I didn't know I had to lock the door and the security guy was out to lunch. That ward was an isolation ward for violent people who were there on court order or sentenced there. Thankfully, the guy who got out just went to the day room and turned on the TV. When the nurses said he had to go back, he did. The janitor who usually did that ward was off sick, and I'd never even been to that side of the hospital before. I wasn't told of any special rules or anything. Sounds like that hospital's orientation program was more figure it out as a violent patient roams free than here's what you need to know. Story 12. I ordered 6 ASME water heaters and 3-phase configuration for a job. There were no 3-phase electrical anywhere on the job site. If you're not familiar with plumbing, ASME heaters are made to order, non-returnable, and you can't convert them in the field to the correct electrical configuration. $9,000 a piece. Boss was not happy. I thought I was about to get fired. Luckily, we were able to make it up elsewhere further down the line. Story 13. Not me. I worked at a gas station pumping gas. There were 2 of us, one for each island, and it was a slow day, so we were talking while one of the cars on his side was filling up. After a while, we noticed gas leaking from the bottom of the car. My partner shut it off quickly and went to inform this elderly lady about a problem with her gas tank. The lady looked in her side mirror, then turned and quickly looked over her left shoulder, seeing the pump sticking out of the filler. She then looked up and said, "You didn't, you idiot." Not knowing what was going on, she backed up and she got out screaming at him while opening up her trunk. There were 3 or 4 inches of gas poured directly into her trunk, which was full of shopping bags. She berated him, called him an idiot for using the wrong tank while the real one was hidden under her license plate. He then calls her a witch right as the owner comes over. Basically, the woman's departed husband had some sort of auxiliary tank installed in the trunk at one time. The filler was on the driver's side with a shiny chrome cap that you couldn't miss. My coworker got scolded for the foul language, but the owner knew it was an honest mistake. No real disciplinary action was taken, and the owner took care of the client. Story 14. I accidentally took down a small network for a church. I was eating a donut and looking at a workstation screen trying to solve an issue. The staff at this site were weird about turning off monitors to save electricity. One of them said something about the monitor next to the one I was working on being on, so without looking, I reached over and hit the power button. The screen I was looking at stopped responding, and when I got up to check the server, I realized I had hit the power button on the server and not the monitor. Story 15. Back in the day of floppy disks, the big boss was working for a week on a job for a presentation for a client. Lots of spreadsheets, etc. On the day of the presentation, he gave the floppy and a blank to the new 18-year-old fresh out of tech high school with high grades and data processing IT guy to make a backup. You would put the original in the drive, run the backup program, put the blank in the drive, it would go back and forth and copy the original to the blank if you didn't screw up the process. My immediate boss told me he had to go to bat for me big time to keep my job. Story 16. I was running chips in a casino. I had a card of big chips that was set to a certain amount, and I was coloring tables up, taking small denominations and giving back $100 chips. The balance of my cart should never change, so if I buy $5,000 worth of $25 chips, I give $5,000 worth of $100 chips. At one table, I took $500 more than I gave, putting my card over by $500. I reported the mistake to my bosses so they could check cameras and see where the mistake happened. Between reporting that mistake and the next time I balanced my cart, I had organized my cart stupidly, and I buried big chips with small chips, which set my count off even further. The chips were there, but I was counting it wrong because of bad organizing. I had to report the second, non-existent mistake to my bosses. 10 minutes later, the surveillance supervisor comes to me to take the $500 and show me where the mistake was in my cart. Nothing here was major, but I still felt like a complete freaking idiot for days. Story 17. Working on an automatic failover in a Cisco ASA for our main outside interface and accidentally set up a NAT loop that brought the whole org down for any external communication for 2 days, while we tried to find the needle in the haystack of ACLs that caused it. In my defense, it took 4 layers of TAC escalation and 6 Cisco engineers to stumble upon it. 150 employees just suddenly didn't have anything to do. No email, no internet, no connection to any cloud services, nothing. My boss was like, "You ain't a cowboy if you ain't been bucked off," or in other words, sometimes when you're working hard, stuff goes wrong, learn from it, move forward. Story 18. I used to be a realtor. I listed a house, helped the sellers arrange staging, and hired a professional photographer. The listing looked great, there was lots of interest, multiple strong offers, everything went unusually smoothly. Driving home from the closing, I was thinking how good it felt that the clients were so happy. So happy with the price they got, how smoothly it went, the photos, the staging, screw the staging. I forgot to notify the stager that the house had sold. All the rented furniture was still in it. If the buyers wanted to be sticklers, they could keep it all. I immediately called the buyer's agent, but she didn't respond for hours, and I was crapping bricks. I called the stager and admitted my giant screw-up. She pulled guys from other tasks and got the furniture out once I finally got a hold of the buyers. I ended up buying gifts for the stager, the buyers, and the buyer's agent. That day is one of the reasons I decided to no longer be a realtor. Story 19. Trusted a coworker in an industrial environment, specifically that they wouldn't be stupid enough to override the machine safety mechanism that prevents you from increasing the thermolator temperature above 120 degrees Celsius and continuing to operate. Parts were coming off the line with a lot of splay, and my mistake was not checking the TCU temperature page and opening the door containing the mold. Story 20. This wasn't really an error, but I worked at a Midwest bank HQ, and the lady who normally pays off the bank's borrowed money when bonds mature had to be at a conference in North Carolina for a week. So she left me instructions to pay off a $103 million loan that was going to come due while she was gone. She left me with a deposit/withdrawal slip from the bank's own account and the wiring instructions. I was to fill the slip out and exactly at 3 p.m., go to the 5th floor wire room and ask for a certain lady, then hand her the slip and the wiring instructions to the DTC in New York. Well, the withdrawal slip didn't have enough amount boxes for that money. You could only go up to $99,999,999.99. So I had to get another one and break it up into 2 sums, one for $50 million and then one for $53 million. The lady in the wire office didn't know who I was, and for all she knew, I was a crooked employee wiring $103 million of the bank's money to my own offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And the thing was, it was such a large amount of money that the interest on it was more than my day's wages just dealing with her for an hour. Finally, I had to go back up to corporate trust and get a bank VP to countersign it, or she was not sending the wire. Had she not, the bank would have missed its repayment and their credit rating would have been lowered, not to mention the bank shares falling because of a missed payment. None of those frickin' VPs would countersign because they didn't know or trust me either. They thought I could very well be stealing from the bank and refused. I had to go to the bank president and explain the situation, and he was clearly not happy. But he called the wire office and said they were to accept my slips and send them as soon as they got them before the goddamn DTC closed, because if they didn't, I would have to fly to New York and be in the DTC when they open with the money. I hated that job, but that is my fun story. At the time, I had to write a check for $103 million. Story 21. I used to be a custodian for many years. One afternoon, I was leaving the lunchroom after mopping it. I was walking down the hallway to the custodian closet to clean the bucket. This annoying sixth grader who was always talking trash to everyone started talking trash to me. I don't know why I retaliated, but I bopped him in the head with the end of the mop stick. He teared up and said he was going to tell the principal and his parents. I walked off, went home, and I thought the police were going to head to my house later that evening and arrest me. They never did, and I did keep my job. Story 22. Let's see. I lost a kid as a ski instructor? That sucked. He was ill-mannered and hard to keep track of, a non-English speaker who didn't want to listen to my crappy Spanish. This was on a huge mountain too, Heavenly Valley. Luckily, a lift operator nabbed him and handed him off to a ski patroller. Then there's the cabinet shop I was working in a couple of years ago. I was trying to make a rabbit cut on the table saw, lining up my mark with the saw blade at the back. I decided to turn the saw on and move my piece into the blade from the back. That piece of wood left my hands like a bat out of hell. Table saws are insanely powerful, and I gave that thing a nice chunk of wood to throw at its absolute hardest, fastest speed. I put a hole in the metal garage door that faced the saw. I'm lucky I was standing to the side. The first thing was not so stupid. The saw thing was definitely stupid as hell. Story 23. Early in my career, I was out working on a two-man truck fixing potholes. I was driving and my partner accidentally hit the radio mic and we ended up broadcasting our entire conversation to the rest of the public works department. The discussion ranged from talking about what a total schmuck our boss was to discussing performing whistles on one of the women who worked in the radio room. Those were the worst of the conversations. It went on for 2 hours until another crew spotted us and told us what happened. Besides being embarrassed to show off our faces in the bullpen at the end of the shift, the worst part was our supervisor's reaction. He came out to the bullpen before we went home and walked up, shaking his head. He took us aside, away from the rest of the crew, and told us to be sure to have our rain gear with us tomorrow. We were the designated flagging crew for the next 6 months. The only job I truly hated was flagging, and he knew it. The radio room operator was cool though. She winked at us whenever she saw us in the building. For context, this was back in 1980. I learned from that incident. Story 24. I worked at some finance company a few years ago that frickin' sucked, and I had put in my 2 weeks notice. On my last day, this advisor was being a schmuck to me, and his client was on his back, which meant I had to make crap happen. I can't remember all the details, but over the span of 2 days, this client was closing an account by moving funds over, and I accidentally moved all the funds over instead of in 2 separate transactions. No clue why this was a problem and honestly didn't care. I left and have no idea what happened after that. Screw that crap hole place. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 25. I threw away about $25,000 worth of old scrap parts. When we perform a warranty repair, the manufacturer requires us to hold on to the remove/failed parts for a certain number of days in case they request them. They do this to inspect them to discover how the failure occurred, but I suspect it's only to make sure we actually did the repair. Years ago when I first started, the guy training me didn't like the job. He wanted to go back to sitting at the parts counter rather than working in the warehouse, so he did the bare minimum in training. One task I had was that each week I would take a list of all the repairs that the manufacturer reimbursed us for and look for repair order numbers with parts cost on them. I was then supposed to make note of the repair order numbers, find the parts tagged by the RO number, and throw them away. Easy job, right? What was never explained to me was that we have to wait a minimum of 30 days from the RO number appearing on this report before we can throw the parts away because that's how long the manufacturer has to request the part back. The stapled list of RO numbers was sitting on my computer in the warehouse and no one told me why I had to wait 30 days. So, being bored one day, I decided to be proactive and a good employee and scrap all the lists at once. Little did I know that a certain recall for replacing control arms on one of the models was active, and the manufacturer was requesting every single part back. Oh, and if we cannot return the part, then the manufacturer will not reimburse us for the full repair. So the parts department had to pay back the service department the full repair. It was a little over $1,000 per repair. I must have thrown away 25 plus control arm kits. Surprisingly, I still kept my job. My manager took fault in not having me trained right. I'm grateful for that because a decade later, I have his job, and I make damn sure I explain the ABCs all the way to the XYZs of why we do what we do and the consequences of doing it wrong or not at all to my employees. Story 26. I wrecked a battery-powered knockout punch for steel control panels worth $2,000–$3,000 Canadian. In my defense, they asked me to come in on Saturday for overtime, and when I needed help, my supervisor was nowhere near to be found. As per effing usual, I went for it and set it up wrong and jammed it up. The real mistake was not owning up to it right away. The next week, another guy tried to use it and realized it was broken, and I claimed ownership for the mistake. But I should have owned the mistake sooner and resolved the issue. We could have sent it away for service sooner. Mechanics in-house couldn't fix it. A lesson I learned when I was younger: always own and report your mistakes as soon as possible, and if you can, try to have a solution in mind. I've got respect for folks who aren't afraid to own their mistakes, and I hope the bosses do too. Story 27. I was a support tech for a company that had a lot of outsourced employees in India. For some reason, probably sharing accounts, they never remember their passwords. Instead of doing it right, someone wrote a tool that called our DB2 old database and updated a specific account with a known password. At some point, management wanted to know how often this was happening and who it was being used for. I took the time to add logging. I wanted to capture the entire update message in the log but misused the pipe character. In DB2, the pipe concatenates strings, while in shell scripting, it pipes output to a file. I made this change on a Friday. We had someone call for their password to be reset to the known password right as I was about to leave. I'd shut down my PC and was saying goodbye for the weekend when someone called me directly saying they couldn't log in. Basically, my script did an update without a where clause on a production DB on the password table. This means I reset every user login at the same time. The only good news was that it was to a known password. We had great audit tables, so I got it fixed 64K updates later, but to this day, I fear having to manage any database where passwords are held. Story 28. I opened a commercial-sized roll of photo paper with the lights on, then did it again the next day. $1,500 loss each time. I'd worked at the photo lab for years without incident, so when it happened the first time, I just went straight to my boss. I said, "Hey, so I'll understand if I have to pay for this, but I just did the stupidest thing ever. I've been working too much overtime and I obviously need sleep or something, because I just exposed the whole roll of paper for no reason. I literally just didn't turn off the light switch and my brain couldn't comprehend why I could see this roll of paper that I've never seen in light before." He didn't even seem shocked. Best boss ever. He just said, "Don't worry about it," and he was sincere. The next day, when I did the same exact thing, I just sat in the brightly lit dark room for a while and cried. I went out and told him he could fire me now. His disappointment was far worse than anger would have been. Somehow, I kept the job for another few years. Story 29. Oh man, I, a lowly product manager, was a last-minute invite to an executive meeting, president of the company, multiple VPs, and me. Out of the blue, the senior project manager puts me on the spot. She calls me out by name and asks me to brief the president on our proposed strategy. I was completely unprepared but managed to get through it, speaking unbroken for the next 30 minutes. I was a little annoyed, but it went okay, so I didn't give it much thought until I suddenly woke up at 2 a.m., remembering that my VP and I both have the same first name. She wasn't asking me to present, she was asking him, and I just took the mic and rambled through his content for half an hour like an idiot. Story 30. I clicked a link that gave away our company's Amazon password. The next day, we started getting asked for updates on PlayStation, Xbox, TV, and iPad orders. We sold power tools. I owned up to it, and the other 10 people who answered emails were shown the same email. 8 of them said they would click it, 1 said they would ask for more details, and 1 said they knew it was fake, and that's why I didn't get fired. On the other hand, I saved the company thousands of pounds because I found out they were selling very expensive tools for a $5. So, swings and roundabouts. Story 31. Not sure I can think of a single dumbest moment, but here's a list. While training to be a security camera technician and removing old cameras from a store, I cut all the cables going to one camera at once, including power and ground. There was a spark and the entire store went dark. I somehow burned my fingers in an ice maker. I went to fix a dripping faucet and forgot the very important step of turning off the water. This happened when I hadn't been doing apartment maintenance for very long. As a bagger at a grocery store, my first job ever at 18 during my senior year of high school, I don't remember how it started, but I got into a verbal argument with the Salvation Army bell ringer outside the store. It got loud and concerning enough that customers went inside to complain about the bell ringer and the bagger who might come to blows. The very next day, also as a bagger at the grocery store, my English teacher from my freshman year of high school was in the store, giving zero care about her remembering me. I told her what I thought of her teaching ability, pointing out that I was no longer her student, and there wasn't crap she could do to me. I just told her that I was just another customer calling a schmuck, and this would have worked out great had I not been wearing my employee name tag. That was the last hour I wore that name tag. Said teacher was in her early 80s, and no one saw it as a student yelling at an elderly teacher who was in dire need of retirement, but rather a bagger yelling at an elderly woman. 17 customers complained. Story 32. I was programming a machine and accepting the final acceptance tests, which involved running it nonstop for 20 hours. I really shouldn't have touched anything during this phase, but my robot programmer and I noticed we could save some serious time by flipping the giant table a little sooner. This table was probably a couple thousand-pound trunnion that flips in a few seconds. After watching it for so long, it was almost like an itch that needed to be scratched. I made the change and it immediately witch slapped the robot with a ton of steel. It should have worked, but I missed one check before downloading it. LOL, that doesn't happen anymore. Story 33. I took a second job at a plant that condenses and cans milk. I was a temp, but the plant manager gave me free reign to come in and clean literally any time, which was as convenient as a second job gets. All I did was assist with basic stuff and then never-ending cleaning. Milk, you know? There was this absolute idiot of a guy who'd been there a long time and liked to mess with new guys. I was 21, 22, and had never used a forklift, which was his job. He caught me in the open and hopped off his lift that had a double stack of sweet and condensed milk on the forks, and he told me to take it and put it up for him. I told him I wasn't up for that and I'd never used a forklift. He was taking the whiz and I knew it, but I seriously had zero craps to give at this job, so I let him convince me and I told him, if I mess this up, it's on you. Well, I messed it up. Rule 1, never drive where you can't see. I had 2 full pallets of canned milk and I just tried going the direction I was pointed towards the warehouse, poking my head out the side to try and see where I was going. The dude was laughing and a couple of other guys stopped to observe. I couldn't see well enough and I braked, and either I never tilted the forks back at all or I just braked so hard it didn't matter. 4,000 pounds of sweet condensed milk toppled over and seemed like all of it busted open on the floor, right in the only driveway between the plant and warehouse, so it had to be cleaned up to move anything from here to there. And if you're curious, try drizzling a spoonful of cold, sweet canned milk on your floor and seeing how nice that is to clean up. I was a little embarrassed, but the dude looked like he couldn't believe it, a little scared too. The shift supervisor came running and started yelling at me for driving the lift, and then saw his driver watching, learned what happened, and apologized to me, or was nicer anyway. We had this sort of a Zamboni thing, and I did drive that, so we got it cleaned up with that and some big attachments. But here's the part I'm usually telling this story for. My girlfriend's dad worked there for like 30 plus years at this point and told me I shouldn't listen to anything that dude said. He pulled stuff all the time. And within a year or two, this guy, my girlfriend's dad, had his hip broken against a guardrail by another new guy temp. The same guy suckered into a similar quote-unquote prank. It ruined him. His hip and lower back were badly damaged, and he had to sue his employer of 30 years to cover his initial treatments. And in the end, he only got them to cover his costs for the first 2 years and a payout of $300,000. This was a roughly 55-year-old working man with no other skill set who lost half of his mobility. As I said, it ruined him. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, although I dumped his princess daughter before long. And of course, his employer fired him as soon as he made the initial comp claim because this was a right-to-work state. Cherry on top, this dude was married to the Teamsters Union local chapter president's daughter. He had been trying to organize a union at his job with his wife's support for a decade, and they finally voted it in after his injury and termination, and largely when his longtime coworkers saw how badly he was screwed by their employer. Did him no good, though. By the way, this was a real family environment, boss like a friend, cookouts, everyone knew everyone's kids, etc., all over in an instant. Story 34. Not mine, but this was so spectacularly stupid that I had to share. I work at a college and we had a network engineer. I use quotes because he couldn't figure out how to properly set up Wi-Fi, and would get into arguments with people about whether or not the network was up when it was most definitely down, who had been doing his best to get fired, but the union was protecting him. He was claiming 40 hours of overtime per week, but when the new CIO showed up, he cut the approved overtime to 0 except for emergencies. I'm sure it was a complete coincidence that the AC in the server room started acting up on the weekends as soon as his OT was cut, so he was forced to come in and babysit. Anyways, back to the mistake. Apparently, he lived in an area where there were porch pirates and he ordered a gun. He didn't want it shipped to his home to possibly get stolen, so he had it shipped to the school with his name on it. If he had just taken the box and put it in his car, nobody would have found out. This guy was not that smart. He was proud of his gun, so he took it out of the packaging and was walking around campus showing it off to people. While he was in the union, it's hard to defend someone's job when there are multiple witnesses complaining about him committing a felony on campus, and the police were called. It was the quickest firing I saw there. As a bonus, the AC system in the server room magically repaired itself the minute he was trespassed from campus. Story 35. Oh boy. Well, I work in rubbish/furniture removal. I am the truck manager and am in charge of making sure everything goes smoothly and no one is injured. It can be a pretty intense job smashing furniture and throwing pianos off balconies, and it gets slowed down a lot with health and safety. We had to take a 250-kilogram chair-shaped set of steel scales from a second-story interior balcony, and the boss wanted it intact to donate, meaning we couldn't just push it off onto the concrete. He wanted us to get it into our utility vehicle, so he set up a stack of pallets, and the 3 of us got it onto the pallets, sitting about 8 feet in the air, hanging off one side. He then left and said, "Take your time with it and don't do anything dumb." We needed to adjust the position before tipping it onto the ute, so I did my usual thing of telling my coworker to stand back in case something went wrong. I then started to move the stacked pallets back and forth with all my strength, slowly moving it forward while standing on an adjacent set of pallets. Turns out I had misjudged the weight of what would be the head of the chair that was hanging off the edge, and it falls directly at me from head level. I was luckily able to push it towards the ute tray before it picked up any momentum, and it landed exactly where we needed it. Then I said, "There we go, perfect." My worker was traumatized knowing he wouldn't be able to move it if I got crushed by it, and the boss never heard about it. Story 36. Showing up, and yet I do it every day. Now, I have seen a number of great ones, though. We had an employee who was a real brown-noser. Well, one day, he went through and cleaned out the company fridge and boasted about what a great person he is. He went on and on about how disgusting people were and what a hero he was for cleaning out the fridge of old, stale food. He explicitly even said he found a sandwich that was rock hard. Well, it turns out that rock hard sandwich was the CEO's lunch, and it was supposed to be hardish because it was pita bread, not sliced white bread. Boy, did that backfire. There was also this guy who brought up corn on the shared screen in a meeting. Not only that, the presenter was unaware of his blunder for entirely too long. Not sure how you recover from that. Oh, and there was a big one. We shipped a specialized $20,000 computer to Europe to support a time-critical job we were doing. IT guy preparing the computer forgot to flip the power supply switch to the 220-volt position, and it was immediately blown up when they went to use it. My favorite was an older gentleman I worked with. It's a long story, but they kept him employed primarily because he refused to retire, and the company founder would not fire someone who had been with the company since its founding, which I respect, so they gave him more menial jobs to keep him busy. Well, I sent him a list of parts to order, and at the end of the quarter, management went into full meltdown mode when the manufacturing budget was way over budget. They investigated the issue and discovered he accidentally ordered something like $200,000 worth of capacitors. Now, he might have been able to recover from this, but when we got crates of capacitors, instead of addressing this mistake immediately, he just brushed it off, saying DigiKey shipped too many and stuff, and just stuffed the boxes in a corner of the shop. My favorite involved the same employee. We had a safety shroud that was normally bare aluminum, and somehow we got one and that was powder-coated red. In a meeting, the CEO was like, "Who had the shroud painted red?" The employee immediately went off. "We never approved that. That was an unauthorized change," on and on and on. The CEO had a confused look and clarified and said, "No, we think it's nice, it stands out more." Then the employee went on to say, "And that's why we did, because we were all about safety, so on and so forth." I have literally never seen such a shameless 180 flip in the narrative of my whole life. Like literally the cartoonish definition of a yes man you thought only existed in Hollywood. Apparently, the depiction was based on a real person. Story 37. I was working on email notifications for a client, and for some reason, the query that triggered the notification was not working, so no emails were going out. I thought I knew what was wrong, so I decided to implement it quickly in the live system instead of in development. Unfortunately, the fix didn't work and the emails were still not firing. Stupid me, forgetting I was in the live system. I started poking around with some basic test changes to the query just so I could get more information from the logs to track the issue down. The adjusted query created a situation where it would match every user from the user table to every possible combination of records in two other tables and would try and send emails for every possible instance. This resulted in the system sending out thousands of emails to hundreds of users. By the time I was finally able to get into the server and stop the process, it had already sent out somewhere around 8,000 emails. So we had to set up a system-wide email to explain to everyone to ignore them if they received them, and luckily their IT was able to go into the server and just blanket delete them, but not before a number of important people had already seen the spam. Story 38. Not me, but a coworker. I worked for a company that flew checks for processing. The checks would come in from banks all over the country. We would cut open the bags and dump them on a conveyor belt where they would be sorted by city and the bank they were going to. It was the end of a sort, and all the large bags had been tied up and tossed into the rolling bins to be taken out to the airplanes and loaded up. One small bag of maybe 10 to 15 checks had been missed. The guy that found it handed it to the guy pushing the bin out, and he tosses it right on top. As he is pushing the bin out, he runs behind a Learjet that was powering up to taxi out. On the other side of him was a Navajo with its prop spinning. Guess where that bag of checks went? They made the guy pushing that bin out, the guy who gave him that little bag, and a couple of other unfortunate schmucks pick up all the little pieces of checks from behind the Navajo and tape them all back together. Story 39. Falling for a trap placed by an executive that I later learned was scared of me. My company hired a CIO after years of me leading IT. Supposedly, the PE wanted someone more corporate than me. I wasn't thrilled, but I made the best of it. I tried to work with this guy, but I also started seeing some questionable stuff after a few weeks. One day, he calls me in a panic. He needs an agreement that was sent to him and general counsel, and he couldn't find his copy. He needs me to grab it from the general counsel's mailbox. We didn't grant anyone in IT access globally to mailboxes, but there are tools, mainly for litigation holds, that allow admins to see some high-level stuff and do extractions. So I pulled the attachment. About 80 days later, this guy demands to be made a global admin in Office 365. I'm resistant because his role didn't require it. The internal audit didn't like it either, but they signed off. Did you know that Office 365 security logs live for 90 days? I'd been played like a fiddle. I had no written request from him about that attachment. He denied he ever asked for such a thing, and held that one access log over my head for the rest of his tenure. He worked for us for 8 months, just long enough to spend millions of dollars with his preferred vendors and then quit the week after all of the extended terms he negotiated with them came due. I later learned that nobody trusted him, even up to the CEO, but for some reason they let him do whatever he wanted. Makes me wonder how much he had on some of them. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.